Greetings and welcome. My name is Jonathan Foust, and I'd like to welcome you to this guided meditation and Dharma Talk. A few thank yous before we launch into meditation. First, I'd like to thank our mindful movement teacher for today. A big thank you to Glenn Harrison and Leo Gimo for producing this evening. And also a big thank you to Ray Manioki and Tara Cassidy, who offer mindful dialogue after this session. So if you want the whole smorgasbord experience on Monday nights, at 6:30 you can do mindful movement, suitable for all types. And then that'll take you right into the meditation and the talk. And then afterward, if you'd like to connect with like-minded people, to share about the talk, share about your practice, is beautifully facilitated by Ray and Tara. More information on all those links on my Facebook page and also on my website, jonathanfoust.com. Also, a big thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this event, as it has for the last many years, and to my good friends at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington, which has been the host for Monday night meditation when we're not on quarantine. And I just got word that IMCW, the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, is not going to be having live events until the end of August 2021. So we're going to be online for a while, but hopefully starting in the fall, we'll be live again, also with the live stream. It takes a fair amount of resources to pull off this, between the equipment for doing the recording, the expense of producing and editing and getting all this out there. And it's all offered freely. The whole intention here is that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. And if you feel inspired to make a donation to keep this thing rolling along, it would be deeply appreciated. There is a donation page on my website or somewhere on whatever venue you're observing this. Your support really does help me a lot. Thank you so much. All of my talks are available online through my website. And mostly, I just want to say it is just great to be able to share these practices. Thank you for making the time. And I'm just so touched at how profound it is to be able to connect with people all over the world. So wherever you are, it's good to have you here. After the talk, I'm going to do something a little bit different. It's going to be a dialogue between myself and a very good friend of mine, Shobhan Richard Faulds, who was the CEO of Kripalu Center, the board chair, also the attorney, but also a maniac depth practitioner. And since he stepped down from serving as board chair at Kripalu, he's been doing what we call depth practice. And we're going to talk about depth practice and a lot of his study and the books he's written, and I think you're going to find it really, really helpful. We explore this distinction between being a householder, being in the world with responsibilities and commitments, and then the practices that a renunciate or a monk might do. And is it possible to awaken in householder life? And for the answer for that, hang on. In the meantime, let's take some time for our meditation practice. So reach your arms up overhead. If you like, you can stretch up to the left side, stretch up to the right side. Setting the stage for posture is so important. So you want to make sure that you're not disturbed. Your cell phone is on stun. Explain to your animals and to the humans around you that you're going to be going inward for the next little while. And then if you like, you can close your eyes. And before you begin any kind of practice, just close your eyes and relax and feel. You might just sense what it's like to open your attention to the sense doors. Notice the sounds around you. Notice the air touching the skin. Can you notice any smells? Any lingering sense of taste in your mouth? Are you aware of the light beyond your closed eyes if your eyes are closed? And just take some time just to sense for yourself what it's like to have the sense doors wide open and to sense this quality of awareness that is, what is it that is aware of all these senses happening right now? And there's a very curious thing here. And that is, you cannot feel better by trying harder. Instead, there's this quality of relaxing and actually receiving. Receiving was here. And so let's take some time to begin to explore what it means to receive the moment. And receptivity, you may find, is deeply enhanced through softening and through relaxation. And you might just begin to sense right at the crown of your head, the top of the head and the skull. What happens if you relax and soften and feel? And you might notice some details here, maybe a little enhanced quality of feeling, maybe a little tingling, a little sense of pulse. And shifting your attention, letting it sort of slide down the front of your face, the forehead and temples. Soften, relax, and feel. The muscles around your eyes. What would happen if you relax all the muscles of your face and just feel your face expressionless? Imagine your tongue relaxing so fully that it could fill your lower jaw. Feeling the volume of your lips. And can you relax and feel the weight of your jaw? Sense of the jaw just slightly dropping away from the skull. Feel the back of the head and the base of the skull. Could you relax the root of your tongue down into your throat and just sense the sense of the space inside the throat? Feel the weight of the shoulders. The weight of the arms. And sensing from the inside the volume of your palms, the space inside your thumbs and fingers. And can you now feel the space inside your chest as your body naturally and effortlessly breathes? Could you soften, relax, and feel the space between your navel and your spine? Softening and relaxing the lower abdomen and down through the floor of your pelvis. And feel now the weight of your legs. Imagining you could feel from the inside the tops of the feet and the toes. And the soles of the feet and the heels. And is it possible to relax even more, just to relax the whole body? Relaxing and feeling the sense of receiving the here and now directly through this felt sense. And you might now bring your attention to an anchor of your choice. For some, it might be the natural movement of the breath. Lots of options, the breath at the belly or the nostrils or wherever you feel the breath the most predominant. Another anchor might be the sounds, the actual sounds as they're happening. And yet another anchor might be this feeling in the palms as you relax your palms. Any sense of pulse or tingling or vibration or subtle energy. Whatever anchor you choose for this next period of time, let the anchor or your point of concentration be your primary point of focus. Sensing if you can blend in this quality of deep relaxation with primary attention to your anchor, to what it feels like on the inside. You might find it helpful when the mind wanders to first come back to this sense of inquiring as to what could relax or soften, to this primary sense of receiving on the inside. And as you bring your attention again to your anchor, can you receive the sensation of the breath on the inside? receiving the sounds as they're happening. Any sense of aliveness at the palms. And you might explore what it's like to take this seat of the observer, the seat of the witness, observing without grasping, without pushing away. And you might find it helpful if you have a sense of present moment awareness to explore what it's like to widen and broaden your attention, noticing what's changing, both the anchor in the foreground, and as you relax and receive the moment, sensing as well all that is changing in the background. Exploring what it's like to let things be. At any point, you can begin again, coming back to this sense of relaxing and softening. Bringing your attention to your anchor, to the experience on the inside of breath or sound or feeling. And if it feels right for you, from this seat of the observer, broaden your attention, widen your awareness. Can you notice everything that is changing? Relaxed, alert, allowing. What are you noticing right now? Can you name what is present right now? And can you let it be? In these remaining 5 minutes or so, you might explore what it's like to re-arrive, to refresh your practice. Softening, sensing all the muscles of the face. Could you relax and soften the inside of your mouth? Relax and soften the palms. Could you in any way soften and relax and feel the belly and the lower abdomen? And the soles of the feet and the heels. Deeply relaxed. And at the same time, alert. And you might engage your attention with your anchor. And over the next 3 breaths, explore how intimately you can feel on the inside, here at the point of your anchor. And can you sense the seat of the observer as you widen your awareness to embrace all that is changing? And is it possible to allow all things to be just as they are? Is there anything that could relax, soften, or let go right now? Is there anything that could relax or soften or let go right now? Where do you feel the breath right now on the inside? And you might gently lengthen the in-breath just a little bit and soften on the out-breath. As I breathe in, I'm aware of breathing in. As I breathe out, I'm aware of breathing out. With your eyes closed, you might very gently let your head drift a little bit to the left and to the right. As part of your meditation, just sense how might your body like to move or stretch right now. And take this time for your transition. You might like to, in your own time, reach your arms up overhead. Just stretch up to the left side, the right side. Bring a smile to the lips. Well done, and welcome back. Welcome. It's great to have you here. I'm Jonathan Foust here. I'm one of my favorite people on the planet here, Richard Faulds, otherwise known as Shobhan. He's a fellow Pennsylvania boy. And, I've talked in the past around the power of being with like-minded friends, with spiritual friends. And I've always joked around the thing that I loved about living in the ashram was about being surrounded by maniacs for God. And uh, we're going to talk tonight with one of the true maniacs for God in the very, very best sense. He's a long-term, adept practitioner. He and his wife, Dana, moved to the ashram a long, long time ago. And he served as the lawyer for Kripalu Center for many years. He served as the president, as the CEO, and as the board chair. And then when he finished up that part of his karmic journey, he went off to do depth practice, uh, deep meditation, and lots of writing. He's the editor in 4 books in the Kripalu tradition. The Sayings of Swami Kripalu, Swimming with Krishna, Teaching Stories from the Kripalu Yoga tradition, the Enlightenment Teachings of Yogeshwar Muni, which is about self-inquiry and surrender meditation, and again in the Kripalu Yoga tradition. And his most recent book is Dharma Then Moksha, the untold story of Swami Kripalu. We go way, way back as fellow maniacs, and for about 20 years, we co-led an intensive, a program called the Energy Intensive, which is a 3-day kind of blow out the tubes program. And we both share a lot of love for these practices. So thank you so much for making the time. Richard, Shobhan, really appreciate your time. I want to kick things off, if you don't mind. I gave a talk recently on how to deepen your practice, and I have to say I'm not a natural contemplative. I've certainly done periods of depth practice that have been really transformative, but I've always admired those who dedicate the time and energy and focus like you have. And one of the things that I find really powerful for keeping my practice alive is the why of practice. You know, how powerful it is to dwell on why the practice is so important to me. So you've dedicated substantial life force to your practice, and I'm just curious, what is your personal why?
I think there are a couple of levels of answers to that. So one thing is just constitutional. You know, from a very early age, I had a strong spiritual drive. And what I really wanted most in life was, contact with ultimate reality, to say it in really straightforward terms, to explore like my full potential and to explore higher realities. And I can't really explain that because even before it was a concept or a knowing, there was a drive, there was an urge. So I'd have to say constitutionally, I'm kind of have a natural inclination toward mysticism. So maybe I would say, I don't know that I would call myself a contemplative, because that kind of conjures up the idea of a tranquil, reflective person. And it's not that I'm not that, but I have a stronger drive than that. I have a stronger energy. So I've always been pulled in that direction. But then also, Jonathan, as I've practiced and as I've seen the results and as I've tasted deeper experience and brought forth some of my potential, that's only increased. So I don't think at this point it feels like I'm coming from an ought to or a should or some kind of an ideal. There are times in the past when I think I was driven by some grandiose notions that you might call like idealism. But at this point, it's just what I actually authentically want. It's what I want to spend my days doing. And it's not so much that I meditate all the time or something like that. It's not that. It's not, I don't spend my days doing that. But I'm talking about everyday depth contact once or twice. Without that, I really don't feel like I'm doing my Dharma, essentially, that I'm doing what I'm really here to do.
So it's an interesting thing because there's this thing in the back of my mind sometimes, and for a lot of people, which is like, oh, I have to meditate. Just this sense of like, I made a commitment. I know it's good for me. I don't necessarily want to do it, but I have to meditate. And it's sometimes just helpful kind of linguistically to substitute the word, I get to meditate. Would you say, was there a period for you where there was sort of like kind of the grunt work of meditation and then just something kind of opened up inside that moved you into wanting to meditate?
So I started my practice early in college, actually before college, but I really started a regular practice in my first and second year of college. And I practiced hatha yoga for an hour a day, pretty much. And at some point, I added an hour of meditation first thing in the morning. And I just added an hour. Swami Kripalu actually had a teaching that said, if you want to move through the full range of mind states necessary to actually pursue enlightenment, you should sit for an hour a day. And so I started that practice. And I'd have to say that I can't really ever remember it being I should meditate. I made a commitment to meditate. Because once I got going on that, and I've never interrupted that, basically, that whole time, which is about 40 years ago, the momentum that I built up through that was self-sustaining. And so, there are certainly times I'm busy or pulled in different directions. But to be honest, what I've always done there is I get up early enough that I have the time. So I don't want to seem inhuman or something like that and say I never encounter that. But with meditation, I very, very seldom encounter that. Sometimes, going through all my yoga routines or things like that, I feel like, gosh, I'm just jumping through hoops. But the actual, direct contact with depth self, and, I think I would say it this way, is that I started something and it started evolving. And that evolution is very real. And, I think you can talk about inner states in paradoxical language probably the best. You could say, well, there are things that are constant, that are unchanging, but the most powerful thing for me has been this sense of, it's not forward movement like I'm going somewhere, it's evolution, that my being is evolving. And I don't want to stop that. I don't want to get in the way of that. And I feel so blessed to have it going that I don't want to screw it up in a way, So like I say, I don't want to come across as holier than thou or whatever, but over the years, this is just, it's not so much knowing that it's good for me, because it is good for me, or knowing that it makes me a better husband, it makes me a beder husband, or it makes me effective in life, which it does. It's more like I authentically want and need to do this. This is what I am here to do. It may be unconventional. It does not fit into my family of origin, I'll tell you. But it is what's mine to do.
It's curious because I always love that phrase of your path or your dharma is what you can't not do, and it just sounds like you started your practice, you started it and you very quickly got some kind of like neurofeedback or some kind of consciousness feedback that this was something that was important and you prioritized it, and then a momentum, really built. I always, tell the story sometimes back in the Kripalu days of being contacted by someone in the media looking for a reaction to a story. She said, Donna Karan, the designer, has just come out with a $300 yoga mat bag. What's your reaction? And I knew what the reaction she wanted. And so I said, well, I think it's great. If a $300 yoga mat bag gets someone practicing, it's going to transform their life. And I think it's a very interesting thing that with the call to meditation, the call to yoga is so strong right now because, the suffering and the challenges are so strong right now. Mm-hmm. So for many people, there's this immediate blush of like, whoa, this is great. This feels good. And then challenges start to arise because there's a level of clear seeing that begins to arise. And then suddenly you become more aware of what's between you and feeling happy and feeling free. And there's a quote that's attributed to Swami Kripalu, and I want to ask you about your relationship with him in a bit. And my understanding is that he said that most people stop practicing precisely because it's working.
Yeah, that's an accurate quote. It's 100 people start practicing, and a year later, 99 quit because exactly the right things are happening.
So say a little bit about that, because you've not only practiced, but you've been in relationship with hundreds of people, over the years, if not thousands, who practice and stop. What do you say to that?
Well, I think you were speaking earlier to something you might call the honeymoon phase, and and uh, it's hard to start a practice. So some people don't even have a honeymoon phase because the mind is very agitated, and there are difficulties. That's why the one of the reasons why the yoga tradition has been so compelling to me, not only for myself but in terms of teaching, because the body practices and the breath practices are so essential at getting over that initial barrier when the mind is just so agitated that you really can't sit effectively, and you certainly can't enjoy it. Some people say meditation is a little like boxing, and that's true. So my uh, experience is that the yogic approach of learning how to let go of tensions from the body, as you said last week in your talk, the gross tensions, and then releasing the more subtle tensions from the nervous system through, uh, easy breathing and things like that. That's really important. And the basic yogic approach is, before you start meditating, learn how to relax deeply, like physically relax the body. I don't know that I would go entirely that direction because I think sitting is so important too. But to couple those things and to have like that full spectrum practice, with a little bit of movement, a little bit of breathing, and a little bit of relaxation, and then sitting really makes a lot of sense. Uh, then if someone is taught well and instructed well, or has a natural inclination to it, they will have a period where you just see the possibility. And that's what I would call the honeymoon phase. And you start seeing, wow, I could have a little distance from my mind and all its patterns and conditionings. And that's a time when a lot of people, they get really fired up about practice. And that's why Swami Kripalu said, 100 people start, and a year later, 99 quit. Because that year later is what he was meaning there is, they have practiced, they have tasted something, but you run into a wall. And that wall is you get into the deeper conditioning of the mind. And so I don't think I need to say a lot about that, because I think you teach very effectively, with rain and other pieces on how to work effectively with the mind. But I think, I spoke about evolution, and evolution always involves these, two wings, you could say. One wing is new things are coming in, and the other things are, barriers and obstacles and old difficult patterns are falling away. And it's just not the new light coming in. It's the old, shadow and sometimes garbage falling away. And that is inherently difficult. But I think when you really get viscerally and beyond a shadow of a doubt that that's a positive thing, it's not failure, it's not because you're just morally bankrupt or bad, inherently bad. When you really get that purging process or cleansing process, purification process, whatever you want to call it, is actually what Swami Kripalu said was the right thing happening, then you grow at ease with it, and it actually becomes a positive thing, because wow, that it feels so good. So it's like the wake of a boat. There's got to be the water that goes behind, and that's just what it is.
A lot of people, as they're discovering meditation now, and it's kind of all over the place. The word mindfulness is a hot word. They learn meditation, through an app, or they catch something online.
Mm-hmm.
You had a very unique kind of initiation, is maybe too strong a word, but something that kind of woke you up, and kind of going back to the word mysticism, which you mentioned earlier. And this has to do with your relationship with Swami Kripalu and how that incentivized something inside of you. And I wonder if you might take just a little bit of time to sort of maybe kind of tell us like who he was, and maybe a little bit about your experience and how that influenced you. And then there's some really amazing stuff that you have gleaned through looking at his teachings over the years.
So this is one of those things in terms of your life that you just look back on and, was it serendipity? Was it grace? Was it meant to be? Was it just, random happenings? So I said I started practicing, in the early years of college. And I was very interested in, like I did everything else. I took all the right courses, but on the side, I was really studying mysticism and going to meditation groups and communes and all sorts of, great things back then. And but when I graduated from college, I went right to the Kripalu Yoga Ashram. I literally, I got my diploma, I got in the car, I drove right there. And so I arrived, and Swami Kripalu was given darshan. And so up until that time, I was really searching for something. I was searching for someone or something or some tradition or some book, that really spoke to what I wanted, and I didn't know exactly what it was. Was it enlightenment? Was it, was it a permanent high or something like that? And I, all the Ram Dass and counterculture stuff, I had seen Ram Dass a couple of times. And so anyway, the long and short of it is that I went to Kripalu Center. I won't tell the story. The story is in the book Dharma and Moksha in some detail. But the gist of what happened was, when I saw him, was the first time that I saw a person who had what I wanted. And it was really clear to me. And it was the first time, and literally the impact was so strong because I said, my God, this exists. It wasn't just some intuition, it wasn't just some craziness on my part. This really exists. And so what am I saying? What is this? What did he have? And I knew that he had found a way to bring forth the full power of his soul. Like he brought the full power of his being into the room, right there with you, not in some, samadhi state, but in presence. And it was really powerful. The guy emanated an energy that it felt like you could fly a kite in it. And at the same time, he was really tender and loving. Like it wasn't a blustery energy or a male strong energy. It was a male-female balanced energy that had this tender caring and this sheer spiritual power. And it's not that I wanted those things, I wanted those things, but that's not really what it was. Is I said, he found a way to do that. I want to do that. And that's where it all really began.
So there was something in his presence that obviously lit something up inside of you.
It was the combination of power and caring. That was really the rocket fuel. I had met powerful people and I had met like really lovey-dovey people, but this guy created both of those together.
Can you share a little bit about him and talk about depth practitioners? He was a pretty good example of someone who basically turned his life over to practice. Well, I know a lot of this are in your books.
That's okay. I don't mind talking about it. And I'm not trying to sell books or anything. So, I really feel like I've met a lot of yogis, a lot of lamas, a lot of, Buddhist practitioners and things. And, I have respect and for a lot of people and hold a lot of people in high esteem. And Swami Kripalu feels to me like he was qualitatively different in some way. And I think the reason why he was qualitatively different was because of the rigor of his practice. So the storyline of it is basically for 30 years, he was 10 hours a day in Kundalini yoga meditation. And that rewired his body-mind. I mean, it was really clear to me when I saw him. It's like, whoa, this guy is wired different than anybody I've ever seen. He moved differently. His eyes moved differently. literally, it was like, is this guy a human being or is he some variant of something? And it wasn't like he wasn't a human being, but he was different. He was qualitatively different. And I think what that it was the reflection of his practice. And so, one of the things that I want to do, in talking to any group or this group, is to really be of benefit. And I would have to say honestly that a number of things about Swami Kripalu's life that I emulated were actually not appropriate and were even harmful for me. Like when I said earlier that I had some idealisms and I, perhaps, went in some grandiose notions, I think those came because I was trying to emulate him. Or follow his example in some way. It wasn't like hero worship, but I was like, it's all about intensity and length of practice. Well, it's not really. It's about quality of practice.
Yes, so this brings up a really interesting topic and something that was kind of a major feature of his teachings from what I understand. And that is the distinction between householders, those who are practicing, who have relationships and families and responsibilities and commitments in the world, and those who are renunciates, those who have who've withdrawn from the world in order to dedicate all of their life energy toward practice. And I know back in our ashram days, there was this sort of idealization, at least in my mind, around the renunciate thing. And I used to think of myself as a junior varsity monk, for many years. So
I think you were a varsity monk myself.
well,
You really were, but go ahead.
Stumbling monk. What is it? What is that phrase? Someone says, another year, another foolish monk, nothing's changed. So a little bit on this distinction, because obviously most of us are living in the world with commitments and responsibilities. And so I think I want to even preface this, because I just find this really interesting, is first of all, is this concept around the why, and that is like, why do we practice? What does it mean to be awake? What does it mean to be realized? What does it mean to be enlightened? And then is it possible, if you're living in the world, how far can you go? Is there a distinction ultimately between being a renunciate and being a practitioner in the world? That's a lot, so I'll just let you start off.
This is really, it's really important, and it's important because it has the potential to leverage people, I think, to a whole different level of practice, in my opinion. So that's why I think it's worth spending time on. So traditionally there was this distinction, and Swami Kripalu was a true renunciate. It was appropriate to him, and I'll come back to that. It wasn't appropriate to me, and that's if there's any negative fallout in this whole thing for me, it was that distinction in our ashram was really mistakenly misinterpreted, in my opinion. So one of the things I want to just say right off the bat is, in our ashram, there was the idea that the householder path was a second-class path and it couldn't take you to a true enlightenment. And I can say to you, that is not true. That's erroneous, it's fallacious, and it's not what Swami Kripalu taught when I dug deeply into it. And that's really why I'm working on this book that I'm having so much trouble actually getting done. There's a fascinating story from the Buddhist tradition on Buddha's life, actually. And so Buddha left his wife and kid. For 6 years, he practiced intensively with some yogis, and then he ended up under the bo tree and he got enlightened. And so I'm certainly saying in a short thing that most of your listeners will already know that part of the story. But here's the little less known part of the story is, not long after he awakened, he returned to the kingdom. He taught some, and he turned the wheel of the Dharma first, but eventually he made his way back to the kingdom, and he came before his wife. And his wife's name was Yasodhara, and there are several stories that say she was not only beautiful, she was really a person of substance, which makes sense, in terms of the Buddha choosing her to be his wife earlier. And so he comes before her, and she looks at him, and they're like, a pregnant silence. And she says, "My Lord, I only have one question." And so the Buddha says, "Ask." And she says, "Did you need to leave me to make your discovery?" And the story says the Buddha was taken back by that question. He did not know the answer. He had to close his eyes and compose himself and basically meditate for a few minutes before he could come back. And then he opened his eyes and he looked at her and he said, "No, I did not need to leave you, but I didn't know that at the time." And the story ends by saying she accepted that answer and they went on. They didn't go on as husband and wife, but they went on in their relationship.
That is such a killer story. I mean,
and
that's a mind blower.
I think it's a mind blower, and it has this really critical, important point in there, which is there's a clear statement that it is possible. And so Swami Kripalu told a story that kind of builds on this and gives us a good jumping off point. And he told us his history. I think it's more of like a quaint story, but there's some element of truth in this. So basically, back in the time of the Buddha, and in that era, somewhere around 600 BC, there were a lot of renunciate monks. They were called shramanas or strivers. And there was a whole social movement of people leaving society and doing these intensive practices. And during that time, yoga was developed, Buddhism was developed, Mahavirya and Jainism was developed. It was a really rich, the Axle age was very rich. And so what Swami Kripalu said is, among all those people that went into the forest to live, there were both single males, and then there were married couples who both left, like a man and a woman, and they would go and they would live their religious life, and they were kind of like co-renunciates, a husband and wife together. And he said, between the two of them, they worked out, these sadhanas that worked for them, these practices that worked for them. And during the whole time that they were doing this, what we would call now research and development, they were doing R&D. And they made really mind-blowing, life-changing discoveries, for humanity. And at the end of that process, they said to each other, this is the quaint part from Swami Kripalu, they looked at each other and they said, for all this time, we have been supported by the householders who have fed us, through their alms. We need to systematize these paths so we can give them a way to realize what we have realized in the most effective way, in the shortest way that can be done in the midst of society. That's a really powerful idea, that they systematized their tradition and they gave back what they had wanted so badly. And so I think in those two stories, whether they're true or not, historically, I don't know. Mythologically, I think they are true. And so that gives us the basis to say, well, what is this householder path?
So you spoke earlier about the four aims of life, as it's articulated, kind of in the tradition of Swami Kripalu. Can you maybe share a little bit about that and sort of how that fits into sort of what we think of as like skillful living, but also around self-realization?
This is such a pivotal and important teaching, in my opinion. So the four aims of life, to state them in contemporary terms, the best way to state them is security, enjoyment, self-actualization, and self-realization. This comes from the Hindu tradition, so it's more self-realization versus no self-realization. But I'd say, an ultimate level. And so the teaching is very clear, and if you get this, you just understand that a householder has four aims of life, all four. So they want to be secure. The traditional word for that was artha, or wealth, but they need material means because they are supporting a household. They need kama, or pleasure, because your life really needs to be enjoyable. If your life is miserable, you're not going to do very well on any level. So you need to establish a certain measure of enjoyment. The third one is dharma, and dharma is such a big word. We could talk all day about the interpretation of it, but in contemporary terms, it's self-actualization. It's making the most of all your potentials. both your worldly potentials and your spiritual potentials. And then the last one, moksha, liberation, that's the idea of basically spiritual growth and evolution. And so a householder has all four of those, and he's pursuing or she's pursuing them in a balanced fashion. And what a renunciate is a person who only has one. They only have the last one, moksha, and they've given up the other three. And so you can find out whether you should be following a householder or a renunciate path very simply. Are you seeking to better your life in any way? Well, if you are, you're a householder. If you're really focused on a balance of things, along even with an intense spiritual practice, like for me, you're a householder. If you're truly in a situation where, with burning zeal, you're pursuing single-mindedly, nirvana, you're a renunciate. And Buddha was a renunciate in that phase of his life. He truly was, for the rest of his life. So was Swami Kripalu.
There's a little bit of Maslow's hierarchy of needs there, that
Absolutely.
if you are food insecure, you're not going to be able to move into any level of creativity and enjoyment and so forth. So there is sort of that sense from the householder point of view of taking responsibility to organize your life in a way that you can experience creativity, you can experience your heart, you can begin to, open up into the mystery. Well, I would imagine, and I think this is true, that I think even if I remember correctly, Swami Kripalu talked about how something in the unfolding of one's life that you will be supported in your practice when you could have get to that level of withdrawing from the world. As he was fully supported by those who followed him.
No, I think what you just said was the Maslow's piece. This is an amazing teaching because this is like 500, 600 BC, and Maslow comes out with this in 1960s, and it's really cutting edge. But it's all there. It's really there. And this is not saying that the first three aims are not important. And if you read Swami Kripalu's teachings clearly, it's just what you just said. He said, a mature person will satisfy those first three aims of life, and they'll move right through, this progression of, like you were talking about, basic security, food security, shelter security, but beyond that, comfort and stability and positive environment. And then it goes, like morality, and then beyond morality into ethics, and beyond ethics, into service. And those are all really critical parts of the path. And Swami Kripalu's teachings are exactly what you said, is if you really do that work, your flower will get ready for the final stage. And that doesn't mean that you will not practice or that you will not spiritually evolve during that initial process. It's not like you set your spiritual life or your inner life aside. No, it's right at the core of it. You're pursuing that, but your work is part of your spiritual practice, and your relationships, maybe your parenting, are part of it. So Swami Kripalu taught success in life, you could call it effective living, but success in life, and then pursuit of realization.
So I wanted to just sort of ask your thoughts around this whole idea of self-realization versus liberation, and kind of where that fits in this model.
Yeah, Jonathan, that's such a critical question in this whole equation. And if I could offer one thing from my life to people, it would be that self-realization, if you want to call it that, or in the Buddhist tradition, it might be called direct experience of true nature, or Buddha nature, that is possible for all of us, and certainly for a practitioner who's systematically working with a good teacher who's able to point out what that is and what it isn't. And crossing this barrier to self-realization or Buddha nature or whatever, it's like moving beyond the limits of the thought-bound mind. is so critical, because that opens up a whole new possibility when you're really not in a gravitational field of the egocentric self. And that is possible, so that's realization. And you have to pull apart realization from liberation. Liberation is some ultimate possibility of humankind and each individual. And in the Buddhist tradition and the yoga tradition, it generally is seen as having two components. One is called dukkanta, and the word means the end of all misery and suffering. This is like a technical statement. It's not like a flowery statement. Like, just think of that: the end of all misery, all forms of misery and suffering, complete. And then the next one is mukti, which is this tremendous freedom, and really like an elevation and an upliftment, and just not only a elimination of suffering, but basically a joy. And so with realization, you can glimpse that. You can actually taste it. It's not only glimpse or taste, you can be in periods of it. But the idea of establishing yourself in a steady state of that is, what Swami Kripalu said was, that is a different endeavor than knowing it. Because one involves basically like effectively setting aside the mind, and the other involves dissolving the mind away. And if you are living in the world, and I don't even want to say it that way, if you are in a life where you're receiving nurturance and sustenance and good things from a whole range of relationships, you need a mind that is a good, healthy, strong mind with which to interact with the world. That's not a bad thing. But Swami Kripalu set that aside. And I think the Buddha set that aside, came to death's door. So I guess what I would say in this piece is, pursue realization intently, because it's accomplishable and because it's an absolutely critical step. Liberation is just a dream without realization. And if you establish yourself in realization, then open up to other possibilities. But that sequence is so critical. And it's the realization part is, Sylvia Boorstein said, it's easier than you think.
Well, and so much of kind of getting caught in sort of that myth of liberation, as I like to say, that so much of my spiritual career ended up being chasing lights and rainbows, because there would be a transcendent experience, and then when it would change would be followed by depression. What did I do to lose this? And it's been such a reframe for me to recognize that those glimpses are deeply, deeply nourishing. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi has this little phrase, which is it's so cute. He says, "You water the root and enjoy the fruit."
Mm-hmm.
And in many ways, just as you're describing it, when you can move beyond the linear mind and rest in that presence, or rest in that mystery, it waters the root, and everything becomes more alive and more present.
And that kind of practice, just what you described, that's the essence of the householder practice. Is, you certainly have a learning phase, and we'll go through a phase, but the core of it is learning how to periodically move beyond the limits of the thought-bound mind, if we're going to use that term, or rest in the presence, be present to the presence. There's all sorts of words that people use, which can get very confusing. In the early days, they used to call it superconscious meditation, but the idea is, it's outside that tumult of the mind. And then most of the householder's life will just be nurturing, watering the roots from a practice that regularly brings them into contact with that for periods of time. The old Maharishi thing, 20 minutes twice a day. That's, if you spend 10 minutes from those 20-minute periods in that beyond mind place, your life will be very, very different. And my personal experience is that over time, your hunger and thirst for that will actually begin to, you'll say, I want to know, I want to know this fully, and that's where I am. And it's not like where I am in terms of like having accomplished something. Where I am is I'm very clear on what I want most. And it doesn't mean that that's the only thing that I'm pursuing. It means that, that I will die happily if I know that in this, in this particular endeavor is where I invested my true life force. And that involves, hopefully being of benefit to others as well. But anyway, that's just me.
That's so well put. Um, I've got about 15 other questions lined up, and we are right here at time.
Oh, wow.
I just want to thank you for your friendship and for walking this path and so articulately describing kind of the inner world and what's possible in this practice. You are an inspiration.
Jonathan, uh, I say hi to your community, and I'm just glad to have you as a friend too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and onward and to be continued.